Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, the NHL, to entertainment and political props. Head to betonline.ag today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. State of State is proud to partner with Illumination Brewing for another season of crafting State IPA, the perfect tailgate and game day beer for Penn State football fans. State IPA is available now at your local beer distributor, grocery store, plus select bars and restaurants. Visit illuminationbrewing.com/beer/state-IPA to learn more. Must be 21 years or older to purchase. Please drink responsibly. Also, State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Following a heartbreaking loss to Ohio State, Penn State will have the official Penn State whiteout game at home at 8 p.m. Eastern on Peacock this Saturday night, hosting the 5-4 Washington Huskies. UW is coming off a home victory against USC. Penn State obviously coming off of major disappointment. Can the Nittany Lions rebound and stay on the winning track and focus on a potential college football playoff berth? Like, comment, subscribe, rate us, turn on notifications. As always, get at us on social media at State of State Pod. Get in our comment section on YouTube. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel for just 99 cents a month. You get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free shows, commercial-free shows, just 99 cents a month. We've all been sick of the ads lately, and they should be winding down here pretty soon with the political stuff. But still, if you don't want to watch any ads, hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast, and you can get all of our shows ad-free, 99 cents a month. It's a decent deal. Speaking of the comments on YouTube, I think our video recapping Penn State versus Ohio State on YouTube was our most commented on video in the history of this podcast platform, which dates back to 2021. So thank you all for getting involved. Obviously, the loss to Ohio State stirred up a lot of emotions and thoughts. So just to kind of, it's hard to really close the book on this game entirely, Justin, but what are your thoughts now that we're a couple days removed from the Ohio State game?
I hate to just be like basic about it, but I mean, at the end of the day, it does come down to personnel. I think James made a great point when he said it's not about plays, it's about players, like in those different type of situations, and making sure that your players get the ball in crunch time. Along with that, you have to also understand just the makeup of, overall teams and position groups and how that goes along with game theory and executing and things. I know it's sometimes very basic, but sometimes it can get a little bit more nuanced than you think based on how we're winning, how we're defending, and like the overall makeup of a team. So like, again, maybe sometimes I'm biased from a personnel perspective, but I think it just shows that there's still room to grow in that personnel aspect. And I mean, I think somebody put out a little tweet yesterday about just even the funding. We mentioned on the podcast last week that we know that the roster that they spent was $20 million, and Penn State was around,
to your point,
around 20. But there was like another report that, just overall donations to Ohio State was around like $50 million versus our 7.5. So it gets really interesting and that's sometimes from the point that I'm looking at where it's like, all right, how are we making these different things regardless of what it is? But it's like finding those players that get us over that line and in critical positions. And when I say critical positions, not just your win share of your quarterback and left tackle. It's like, no, it's playmakers, right? Like those one-touch guys, and being able to keep defenses on their heels to so they're not just teeing off on like our situation. And it's a critical thing. It's like when you look at it from a resource standpoint, it's like, all right, then you kind of look at the coaching a little bit differently. Like, hey, that's actually pretty good. That doesn't excuse the loss. That doesn't excuse not getting over the hump. That doesn't excuse 1-10, because like that hasn't been the case for a long time. But like James said at the end of the press conference, like this is a new day and age of college football with the expanded playoffs and the resource allocation and the resources that are, I mean, two buckets, right? We got some coming from media rights with the salary cap that was announced next week, but also from fan engagement, invested fans, you know, and how we philosophically look at pay for play or what it takes to win. And that's just something that we have to come to grips with.
I wanted to ask you a question on the player evaluation front, and we will get to Penn State versus Washington, a full game preview of that. I was thinking about this over the weekend, and I think about the positions that under James Franklin, his staff, his evaluators have focused on and where there has been success. And quarterback, it's very up and down. At running back, there's been consistency, and then the high ends with Saquon Barkley and Miles Sanders. Defensive end, pretty darn good track record, really good track record when it comes to defensive backs. Linebacker has been up and down, I would say. It's not, you know, I know there's the nickname of linebacker U, but there's been good years and thin years at that position. And I would say this year is an above average year at that position. Defensive tackle hasn't really, I can't remember the last time I saw just a pure alpha defensive tackle at Penn State. It's been a long time. Offensive line, you got guys that go to the NFL, you know, you hit with the tackle spots, those sorts of things. The one that's kind of fucked up to me, why the hell are we focusing so much on stockpiling, like 5 tight ends that could start for just about any team in the country? And then at wide receiver, we seem to just be like, well, if this guy's 5'9", 170 pounds, and he runs a 4.5, we're good with that. He won't beat anybody, but that's a Penn State wide receiver. Am I the only one that looks at that as like, there's kind of a flaw in what you're recruiting on offense?
Yes. And then you got to remember, when you're recruiting, it's not like drafting players, right? You have to, like, the players get to select where they want to participate. And how you value those players is how you value the different recruiting, how much assets that you go after, those different guys. I saw an interview with Dabo Swinney, and he said, like, we recruit everybody the same, whether it's Trevor Lawrence versus a walk-on. I think that's complete bullshit. Like, you don't recruit everybody the same, and that's what you have to understand. So I think when you have success at a position, it helps recruit and gain equity in the marketplace for those top end tight ends that want to come and play with you, versus how much equity or how much stock you put into certain level of receivers. I think we missed the boat when we had KJ, Jahan Dotson, Chris Godwin. And I'm a big, you know, how we branded that group. And it's like, and how we branded the success of the receivers, because I think that gets lost in the case to even attract more receivers. And I think the thing that we talk about with receivers, we've had a lot of turnover at that receiver position as the coaching position. The receiver coaching position has had a lot of turnover. And the philosophy that James has is that every coach is the head coach of the room. So they have, you know, they have a lot of say in the guys that they bring in. Obviously, the buck stops with him. But you have those different flavors coming in. So there hasn't been a consistent measure of like, what is that receiver base looks like? Whether you have like, even like you're naming guys from back then, but like Jawan Johnson, he transitioned and went to the NFL, that type of talent. You got, what's my man's name? Irv Charles. He's now like, he was somebody that got kicked out, but he plays for the Jets now. So like, we had premium talent and different level of guys, whether those things were bad experiments, but then we had like KJ Hamlers, then we had Jahan Dotsons, and like these guys, like, I mean, Jahan, he was like, UCLA kind of dropped him late in the process, and we were lucky to have him, and we always thought he was a great receiver. So like, we had talent, but we never really captured, I think, highlighting that talent to attract new players. And then when a new receiver coach comes in, like, they don't really have any equity. So when high school receivers are looking like, hey, who am I playing for? It's like, all right, well, what have you produced? And whether they're up and coming coaches and things of that nature versus everywhere else. I mean, when Manny Diaz jumps in for Brent Pry, he can recruit a top end linebacker. Like he has the pedigree to say, hey, this is what it is. The school kind of makes up from that standpoint of linebacker and you can attract an Abdul Carter, right? Like you can attract like Tony Rojas in those different type of situations. It's just very interesting. Even when you talk about the running backs, I mean, Coach Huff, like he had Miles Sanders, Saquon Barkley, and when that happens, you get that reputation. I mean, Journey Brown, I mean, he was going to be another one that was in the line. Then you get those top level guys like Nick Singleton because of the equity of that position group and how they are developed. The same thing that you're seeing in the secondary. So I think when we talk about the receivers, the problem that we're having is like somewhat of an inconsistent thread line of coaches in that room. And then when you talk about the tight ends, I don't think it's necessarily built that way. I think Penn State's an attractive place for like high-end tight ends coming out of high school to want to play. If I'm going somewhere, if I'm a tight end, I want to go somewhere where they're going to be throwing me the football and he's the prime target. And they got Mike Gesicki, they got Theo.
Flaw?
There is a flaw. There's a flaw. There's a flaw in that.
You and I talked about it. So not to cut you off, you and I talked so much in the game after Ohio State is that it wasn't Drew's fault. It wasn't the offensive line's fault that he didn't have time to throw. None of that. It was just nobody was freaking open. And there's only so much you can do when Tyler Warren, a tight end, is your primary target. They did exactly what you said to do. They doubled Tyler Warren. They played man with everybody else. Nobody could get open. So you just continue to be like, let's have 5 tight ends that could plausibly start for us right now and no wide receivers that really threaten anybody. So is it time to be like, hey guys, stop recruiting this way?
It's interesting. I don't know how they're valuing different players internally because, like, I mean, I used to butt heads with the receivers coaches where I would bring up a receiver. Like, I think this guy's really good, Jamar Chase, or Jamison Williams. And I remember not negating their talent, but kind of having someone that fits within the scheme of an offensive philosophy, right? And that someone like maybe overvalues, like, hey, he does this well, does this. And it's like none of that matters on the outside. I like me as a DB, like NFL DB, I fear or I on my heels when I play against a receiver like this, regardless if they catch the ball or not. There's a lot of things that come along with that. So I think sometimes it comes down to that talent evaluation, not necessarily recruiting, because again, the players are selecting the schools. So yes, you're right. There has to be some more stock and value placed in, I think, explosive perimeter players. And I don't know what they're doing internally from that standpoint, but yeah, I think that's definitely something to look at. I mean, even in the transfer portal, whether you throw a couple more percentage points to that position group, that you need to get someone that's dynamic and proven to be dynamic. Because I would say Lambert Smith was supposed to be that guy, but we had a lot of other things that didn't kind of pan out, whether it was the run game, Drew's first year, different quarterbacks, different offensive coordinators that you have to adjust with and get that going. But there's a reason like LSU gets like top receivers or just go all through the areas, but like they're getting elite athletes. And I think that needs to be a premium situation because all the positions that you named that are having success, they're premium athletes at those positions. You know what I mean? They're getting the top end defensive ends. You don't get Jason Owens that run 4.3 or Michael Parsons that run 4.38 and those different type of things. But it also has to be a nucleus and it has to be valued for the player to want to come participate in that program.
That's where money talks. Doesn't matter what your reputation or your track record is with this. You put a dollar amount on the table, somebody's going to change their mind. I'll say this, Julian Fleming, if this staff was so in love with the evaluation they had of him 6 years ago, and they brought him here in the transfer portal and spent X amount of dollars to bring him here, there's a massive flaw in the way that this team evaluates wide receiver talent, because what he did at Ohio State did not necessarily warrant the billing that he was getting in the cycle, that transfer portal cycle that we got done with. If you were so in love with him 6 years ago and it's like, oh, he's a character guy, he's a Pennsylvania kid, all those feel good things that you can't put any measurables next to, if that's what you're going off of, James Franklin likes to talk about looking in the mirror. Look in the mirror on that one, because what has that yielded? And then the rest of this receiver core is hoping that Trey Wallace takes the next step. And I think he can at some point, but right now It's not happening. Liam Clifford doesn't scare anybody. Amari Evans didn't even have the chance to take the top off the defense. And you got other guys like Tysier Denmark, Peter Gonzalez, I know is out with a long-term injury, but you get all these guys. And it's like, it's maybe, I hope he can. Let's see if he gets on the field. Caden Saunders, maybe. Anthony Ivy, maybe. And it's like, stop saying maybe. A potential character guy or something like that. Show me a dude who's going to scare somebody. That's what held us up against Ohio State offensively.
I completely agree. That's always, I mean, that's how I evaluate receivers.
About this weekend.
No, I mean, it's frustrating, right? Especially if that's just the only hole that, defenses can kind of line up against and play. Like we said, I told you I would double Tyler Warren and make the outside receivers beat me. Like, and it's just like,
well, guess what Washington will probably try and do this week?
100%.
Washington presents similar problems that you experienced against Ohio State. Yes, it's going to be a different level of competition and personnel. A lot of Penn State fans will look at this. According to BetOnline, Penn State's getting minus 13.5 for a home whiteout game at night. So you understand that layer of it. If you look at Washington, you really don't do your homework. You're like, oh, they're 5-4. They're 3-3 in the conference. They had lost 3 of their 4 previous games before defeating USC at home. All 3 of those losses came on the road at Rutgers, 21-18, at Iowa, 40-16, and Iowa's been trending. Indiana, 31-17, and we know what Indiana is, still undefeated at this point. They were able to beat Michigan at home by a score of 27-17. So you can probably point to a couple of things of like, hey, that cross-country travel, understandably, is going to be a challenge for a West Coast team, Pacific Northwest team. So Washington, from my vantage point watching the USC game, is, well, this is a smart secondary. This is a talented secondary. I don't know if it's necessarily the best one in the country or anything, but they're going to give Penn State some trouble because the same things that Ohio State was doing to Penn State this past weekend, Washington did to USC. USC has a lot more talented wide receivers than Penn State does, but they're still dropping into man coverage more often than not. They made sure just about every completion that Miller Moss and company got was contested. And you and I talked about the issues with contested catches against Ohio State. Penn State had next to none. And Drew Aller is good about not putting the ball in harm's way, but he also doesn't go for those 50-50 balls. And for all the reasons I just got done saying, who in this wide receiver core inspires you to do so outside of Tyler Warren? The defense, very active in terms of the pass rush. Is there a true alpha pass rusher for Washington? I wouldn't necessarily say yes. They just have this continuous motor. They don't quit. They diversify the ways that they get after the quarterback. This is a very good linebacker core. They're going to be able to potentially create takeaways with Penn State. And it wasn't until the second half against USC that Lincoln Riley, we talked about this when Penn State played USC. Why isn't Lincoln Riley running the ball? Well, second half, he was like, oh man, Woody Marks is a really good running back and we have a decent offensive line. USC started running the ball. Penn State can run the football against Washington, and you're going to need somebody that catches a pass to create something for Drew Aller and company. When you think about, okay, here's what Penn State just did against Ohio State and what you've seen of Washington, what do you need to see out of the offense this weekend?
I mean, I think you have to make sure you threaten them down the field, like it's just to make sure that box is loosened up so we can get back to our true identity. I think is running the football to, open up the play action, open up Drew on the move and doing different things of that nature. And just getting back to some level of creativity of mismatches and options for all the playmakers, right? I don't think Washington is as skilled or like personnel heavy as Ohio State was. Yeah, I mean, from that standpoint, so I think there is a level of they'll be a little bit more loose and maybe get back to the script of what was going on. But I can't downgrade when you're playing somebody or how you coach against the team when you feel like the players are at the same level or if not better. Like, because like mistakes can turn into pick sixes, and mistakes can turn into 3 points on the board to 0 points. And when you're in tight games like that, there's a different level of risk reward that I think coaches need to go through. So, I mean, maybe it's not the same this week, but again, we have to get to some explosive plays on the ground and in the air. And we got to continue the trend of taking the ball away on defense, because I think that was our most explosive play last week was Zion Tracy's interception, pick six. Right. And when that happens, it's tough to beat top tier teams that way.
James Franklin spoke about it in his press conference this week, trying to get the running game going, and that we saw how well the running game had done for the first 5 games of the season. I'll say that. And you take a look at the strength of opponent, that kind of tells the story there. Nick Singleton's been held to less than 100 yards rushing in his last 3 games for Penn State. Katron Allen's had more success, but we've talked about him enough, and that his skill set is in the muck in between the tackles. That's where he thrives, and that's where Penn State has had success with him, at least. James Franklin was saying, well, it's like maybe it's got to go to some outside zone types of schemes, those sorts of things within the running game. But again, if nobody respects your passing game, not because the quarterback isn't capable or the pass protection isn't going to be there, but if nobody respects the people catching the ball for Penn State, how do you work against what is going to be an 8 to 9 man box?
I mean, it's tough, right? And you'll get minimal production from the running backs. That's just kind of what the case is. And then it forces you to look at your receivers. I mean, it's like, it is disrespectful to the receivers for a defense to play the offense that way. And I mean, I hope they take that as a shot that, like, hey, these guys don't respect us and playing man. And, you know, whether it's taking the shots and having enough protection to take the ball downfield, but that has to loosen up. And I mean, obviously from the truisms of football, it's like, make sure you can run the football, but you know, you look at teams like the Chiefs or things in the NFL, that's not necessarily the case. When you can throw the football or you have a dynamic weapon, you get DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, if this from the game yesterday completely changes the dynamic of the offense. That's just one-on-one matchups and making sure that you find those matchups. And I mean, the game comes down to, like, again, sometimes it's stylistic, but sometimes it's me versus you, and having the better player really makes sense when you're talking about spreading out the offense and just having spacing on an attack side of the offense.
For Penn State's quarterback play, anything that you can glean from the Ohio State game in regard to Drew Hour's play that it's like, hey, this could use some work? And I mean, also, do you expect to see more of Bo Prabula in this game?
I don't know if you see more of Bo Prabula, but it's like, I give grace to the quarterback when he doesn't have anyone to throw to. Just like, I don't care how good of a quarterback you are, unless you're, I mean, even Aaron Rodgers in his early years, he had, you know, Jordy Nelson and different guys like that. So I was about to say that, but like, you can't, it's hard to be an elite quarterback when you don't have anyone to throw to, and when the running game is stifled. Like, it's just, I feel like that's just an unfair evaluation, because again, they're a puzzle piece. They're not the piece in the sense of, like, he's not running the football, he's not doing different things like that. And when we can compare it to top level guys, like, I'm gonna say, let's throw out someone like a Colorado, right? We see Shador Sanders having different levels of success. But like, their receivers are extremely good and explosive, like, and they're better than most of the DBs that they're playing against, right? Whether it's a Cincinnati, whether it's anybody that they essentially play, like, they had actually better perimeter players. So like, and you have a quarterback that can make those throws when it gets to that point. If we don't have just superior talent on the outside, or even from the running back standpoint, like, that's just tough that's just tough on any quarterback, right? Especially if he's not a running quarterback where he's creating that threat to run or extend the play himself. Like, that's not exactly who he is. You know what I mean? So what can he do better? I mean, take a couple more, throw it up, take a couple more shots.
Can take more chances. I thought he had a good game against Ohio State.
It was solid, yeah.
Sure, it wasn't really his fault, but like, you know, there wasn't much more that I looked at on tape and said, man, Drew could have done so much more. It seemed like he was doing everything he possibly could.
I mean, yeah, that's what I said. It's indicative of everything else around the offense and how it's built. Yes, like, when you have those opportunities, then it's like, can that quarterback make all those plays? And then when you have that, like, that's when things are rolling, man. Like against USC, even though he had a couple picks, like, that's when it's like, oh, we had the matchups, boom, boom, we can make those different plays, and he's able to do that. But if you take it all away, he's not a creator on his own. You know what I mean? Like, he's a little bit more mobile than last year, but he's not a dual threat quarterback to where if you go man to man, you got guys running down the field with their back turned to him and he takes off running. You know what I mean? Like, he's not that type of quarterback. And no credit to him, but like, that's who he is. You know what I'm saying? So we may see a little more Bubula. But with that, it's just he has to also prove that he can put the ball in the air and make the throws that Drew can make. So it's a very nuanced situation, and see how UW plays us from a schematic standpoint.
Flipping things, Washington's offense against Penn State's defense. Washington quarterback Will Rogers, formerly under Mike Leach once upon a time, the late great Mike Leach in Mississippi State. It's an eerily similar offense. They want to throw the ball a lot. It kind of duplicates as their short rushing game in that they like to go sideline to sideline. They want to lull you to sleep and try and get you to come up towards the line of scrimmage, tackle people in space, and then try and go over the top. They've got themselves a 6'7", 250-pound tight end, Latu, who is going to create some mismatches. Boston is an excellent wide receiver, leads the Big Ten in touchdown catches. Their running back, Jonah Coleman, is about 5'9", 230. He is a thumper. He had over 100 yards rushing against USC, and understanding USC doesn't have the greatest defense ever fielded right now, but still they showed balance. Will Rogers is going to want to get the ball out quickly. It's going to be a similar feel to the Bowling Green game in that it's like, hey, I got a lot of options I can go here. Jed Fish likes that style of offense, kind of like what he was doing in Arizona the year before. The rushing game could be there for Washington. You're going to have to slow that down if you're Penn State. And again, it's looking at some of the ways that Ohio State was able to get scores. Like, credit to Penn State. You held Ohio State, which is average about 40 points per game, to 20. And you talked about it extensively in our recap episode after the game against the Buckeyes. Is the 2 touchdown passes came when you put a wide receiver on a linebacker in a crossing route, in a, those mesh plays, basically, where you're looking for picks, natural picks within the flow of the personnel that are on the field, and you're trying to get guys open in space. Washington likes to do the exact same things. It's not going to be the exact same top-end skill level that you just saw against Ohio State, but again, eerily similar in the way that they're going to want to attack you. Penn State's defense, while they gave up critical things here and there, still were the reason why you were in the game at all against Ohio State. What does the defense need to clean up against Washington, and how can the defense put the clamps on an offense that is pretty balanced?
I think you got to put the cork in just the run game, right? Limit those explosive plays, even though Ohio State has spot plays, and I don't think that's the reason they kind of were able to do the passing situation. They just have dynamic playmakers back there. Probably the best duo of running backs in the country, right? Like, when you look at like how they perform. So put a clamp on the running game, and again, continue to create possessions on the back end. I think that's going to be critical. And whether we blitz a little bit more, send in Abdul, and just getting more pressure on those passing situations. You see that a lot of teams that do play us, it's more of a timing and rhythmic offense. It's not just somebody just sitting back there looking down the field and just launching and picking us apart. It's typically, like you said, those mesh routes, mismatches, getting running backs on linebackers or receivers on linebackers, and doing it from that standpoint. But getting those quick pressures where our defensive line is beating the offensive line in one move, right? And like just putting guys behind in the down in distance. And from that standpoint, I think those are the keys to victory a lot of times, but that's something that we have to shore up, especially coming off of last week.
The last 3 games for Penn State, USC, Wisconsin, and Ohio State, the defense has come away with an interception, and those have been games with a closer score. I think you can look at the Wisconsin game. The score was closer mathematically than it actually felt, but still, has the defense become reliant on the turnover to seal games?
When in the right position, I think they have. I mean, last week was the first game that, they didn't play their best in crunch moments or critical times, and still lost by 7 points from a top 5 team. So I think, to keep things in perspective, when that has come, whether it was against SC or some of the previous games, like the defense did shut down or have critical sacks, turnovers that sealed the game. So I think they have definitely the potential and capabilities that they've shown from the evidence of impact in the previous games to be able to make adjustments at halftime and be able to win, right? I think last week it was a great adjustment at halftime. The first half was like, all right, they're going trips, bunch, doing all these different type of things, and it's like, all right, let's see what happens after halftime. I mean, Tom Allen's a former head coach, and I think he knows how to make adjustments from that standpoint. But then sometimes it comes down to Jimmy's and Joe's. You got to get to your spots, play right angles, and you got to make tackles, and you got to get there with violence in your heart, and that is the core basis of football. So hopefully they get back to that this week and really show Washington what that looks like.
Speaking of the coordinators, Tom Allen and Andy Kotelnicki both have been under fire since the Ohio State game. A lot of people questioning the offensive play calling, the performance of the defense at certain points. But again, the defense was the reason you were in that game against Ohio State. Is it fair to say that Kotelnicki and Allen just coached, from a coordinator standpoint, the biggest game of their careers and maybe have never been in a position with that was that high profile?
I don't think Allen, maybe Kotelnicki. I think Coach Allen, as a head coach at Indiana, over the years he was there, he played in some pretty big games from the executive spot, and I mean, I can't discredit that. But for Andy Kotelnicki, I think that was probably the best he's seen, right? Whether if they gave a little bit away of that, their personality or their philosophical approach is based on where there's holes against the other team, and you play a team that doesn't necessarily have holes, right? And they have like extraordinary players. Maybe that was the first time that he came up against that, right? I mean, so yeah, the X's and O's, they when they come alive, like those Jimmys and Joes really start to show. And that's something that we go back to the beginning of this podcast, like that talent acquisition piece, really understanding and being critical of that evaluation of the fit, attitude, pure engine, just across the board, because like all those different things cover up. They cover up coaching. Like there's certain areas like that we play. It's like, doesn't matter what you do. Like we know we're coming right here. You see it in the NFL a lot of times. Saquon Barkley, like certain shit people do. Yeah,
Jumping
you
backwards.
can't teach that. And it's just like, that's the bit. I mean, we used to joke around when Saquon was there, like is that the greatest play? It was like, oh, save me, Saquon. It's like, drop off the ball. And it's like, he makes 8 people miss and he takes off. Like, is that the greatest play? Like, no, he's the best player.
Bigger, stronger, faster.
Literally bigger, stronger, faster.
I think that's an important thing to keep in mind coming off this Ohio State game. I think everybody, understandably, the fan base is ticked off, but how would you have dealt with something if you'd never experienced it before? I think that was, I know people hate to hear the phrase learning experience, but it was a learning experience. Are you happy about it? No, absolutely not. You should be furious about it. Be as upset as you want to be. Taking a step back now and looking at this Penn State season, I know last night the first college football playoff rankings came out, and I don't even want to think about those, because for Penn State, the rankings don't matter. Where you're ranked right now, it really does not matter. Is it nice? Sure, it's cool. But you have to win out to make your case for the college football playoff. Before playing Ohio State, your strength of opponent was 26-33. Ohio State now sits at 7-1. Your remaining games, 16-18 is the combined record of the opponents you have left to face. Your one marquee victory was at home, 21-7 against Illinois, who was ranked number 19 at the time. They are now unranked. Penn State can't afford to lose the rest of the season if you want to make it in the college football playoff. If you lose to Washington, who can get Penn State at home, you're out. If you lose to Minnesota, who is trending in the right direction, you're out. If you lose to Purdue, you're definitely out. And Maryland is a team that it's very, very inconsistent, but still, after the Ohio State game, your flaws have been revealed. You can't be the arrogant fan that just said, it's Maryland, that brand, we're better than that brand. We're better than Purdue. Purdue just went to overtime with Northwestern and has been one of the worst teams in college football all season. Anybody can get anybody. And especially this game, don't look at Washington's record. You have to pay attention to what they do on tape from a personnel standpoint. They can get Penn State this weekend. It's a winnable game. Every game, the remainder of the schedule for Penn State is a winnable game. They're also losable games.
I think that you said something critical where it's just like, yeah, you got to throw brands out of the window in this day and age. Like, you don't necessarily know who's on the other side, right? Because now we're starting to see roster construction of the actual core pieces that are being developed. I mean, and Indiana was 3-9 last year. They're undefeated this year.
Is Indiana better than Penn State right now? I think you can make that argument, that you can say yes. And the logo is doing some heavy lifting right now for the Nittany Lions.
You said it, not me.
And here's the other thing for the Fire Franklin people out there who inevitably watch this show. We thank you for tuning in. We always appreciate it. His buyout right now is $56.6 million.
Woo!
It drops to roughly $48 million on January 1st. If you want to do the math at home, subtract $8.5 million every year between now and 2031. He also gets a $400,000 bonus if Penn State makes the college football playoff based on his last publicized contract, which was prior to the expansion of the college football playoff from 4 teams to 12 teams. So has that changed? Who knows? Not really my business, but I think the information is something for you all to chew on. So for all the people that are like, fire him, we were just talking about the numbers earlier on. Penn State's operating at what, like realistically, Justin, 7.5 million NIL for the football team specifically. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
So at what point, reasonably, mathematically, would the Penn State athletic department look at his contract and be like, we'll eat that number?
I don't think Penn State's built that way, to be
They're
completely honest. Not at all. I was talking to someone, an alumni, who was saying like, "Hey, how can the numbers have such a high discrepancy and when the fan bases are the same?" And I'm like, the fan bases are not the same from a philosophical like standpoint or how they look at sports. Like they're not the same at all. We are spoiled from how we had success under. I hate to say it, but Joe Paterno, like it's built under that way where it's like, again, the success with honor. We do this for like the love of the game. And it's just like, hey, no, that's not what that is part of it, but that's not what this necessarily is. So yeah, you better start putting your money where your mouth is, or just shut up.
Well, here's the thing, and I've been very open about this, is that, I grew up as a little kid being a fan of Penn State football. I've been a part of a Penn State family. Mother and brother ahead of me went to Penn State. I was fortunate enough to go to Penn State, covered the team now for years. I'm a customer. Okay. If you tell me for 10 straight years that you're slowly getting better, this is the year, and you still come up short, and it's that incremental progress here and there, don't be surprised when that customer doesn't return. I love the university, the school, the community, so I'm not going anywhere. But if there is a soul on that staff after the Washington game that looks up and sees the student section a little thin, or the attendance a little thin, ask yourself what you just put on tape the weekend before, because that's the thing that drives me nuts. The amount of people that pour their time, money, energy, heart, and passion into Penn State football every single year. And then it's the daring to accuse people of like, you don't care, or you're not showing up for the team or something like that. It's like, I'm a customer. Give me a product that I believe in, because right now I don't believe Penn State can get over the hump of the Ohio States of the world. The distance between Penn State and the national championship, you were talking about like 2 years. I'm like, back of my head, I'm like, it feels like 5.
Like, again, we see teams turn around different situations much faster with 1 player, 2 players. Like even when me and Derek came into the situation, like it was 3 and 9. It was like, hey, all you needed was these 2 pieces, and it kind of changed the whole dynamic of the team. You see it with how Florida State, they had different players and they lost them, and they went from a borderline playoff team to 1 and what, like they stink having 10 people at the game. And so what I would say, like the kind of 2 facts around that is like they just had a game with 111,000 and broke the record at Beaver Stadium ever, right? Moving forward. Then you got the whiteout game moving up. So I do think, again, that the fan base isn't even, you're talking about losing a little bit of trust in what's going on.
How can you not?
I mean, you're absolutely right. You're 100% right. But also like keeping things within context of like, okay, like they're still a top 10 team at this moment, right? So like even when you're looking and just get out of me dealing with different schools and just getting out of the Penn State ecosystem, sometimes it's a level of expectation, and I know probably a little bit too much about how things are constructed from that standpoint, but yeah, I understand the frustration. I understand the loss of trust, and also you got to understand that the open waters are very, very, very scary if you want to kind of go into that bucket, right? And you're right. There things need to be evaluated and looked at with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that they get over the hump. You know what I mean? There's a huge gap when you talk about being good to great versus great to championship. So maybe those are the little pieces that we're talking about.
I think there's the fear of the Bo Pelini effect. Once upon a time at Nebraska had
the Lloyd Carr effect. What happened in Michigan when that time happened? It's happened in a lot of places.
and it's reasonably asking yourself as a fan, and then the athletic department, the people making the decisions, like, when is enough? And realistically, mathematically, people that talk about firing Franklin every other day, and for years they have now, it's like, great. In 2027, is that number manageable from a budget standpoint, I don't know. That's not for me to decide, but that's the challenge that you're sitting with right now. So that being said, I believe in this team that they can win out the rest of the way and make the college football playoff. Nothing is a given. It has to be the proverbial 1-0 mentality. You have to beat Washington. You have to finish the rest of this schedule undefeated, because otherwise holes will be poked in this schedule to the point that Penn State is on the outside looking in, and it's a bowl game that no one cares about. I think that's a very important thing to think about. Like, comment, subscribe, rate us, turn on notifications. As always, get at us on social media at State of State Pod. Get in our comment section. You guys have been very opinionated as of late, and we appreciate it so much. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel for just 99 cents a month. You get all upcoming episodes of State plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. We're all sick of commercials lately. You can do away with them. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast and become a member for just 99 cents a month. All episodes, ad-free, commercial-free. Thank you for joining us. Penn State hosts Washington this Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on Peacock. It is the official 2024 Penn State whiteout game. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, let us know what you think of the show on social media, and check out all of our content on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Search for the handle at State of State Pod. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.